The following is a conversation with Danny Batten, head coach of BST Academy, who has produced fighters such as Jordan Vucenic, who is currently in the UFC. I hope from this conversation you understand just what a great mind for MMA Danny has. If you want to make it to the top and you live in the UK, I would highly recommend checking out some of his stuff and potentially going and training with him. The importance of having a coach that knows his stuff to the level that Danny does is undeniable. If you're going to go to war, you need someone who knows what they're talking about. Enjoy.
Obviously, I've seen your Instagram stuff. And I'd heard my old coach talking about BST Academy and how he always really respected all of the guys that came through your gym. And that was before I even connected with you on Instagram. This was years ago now. So I'd heard a lot about your gym, and I'd heard a lot about the guys that came out of your gym. And I think my old coach was a guy called Windy Miller. Do you know that person?
Yes, yeah, of course. I know Windy.
Yeah. So I used to train under him, and he would speak about, I think he fought at your gym a couple of times.
Yeah.
And you've got a really good reputation, but I just want to know a little bit more about, where did your martial arts journey start from? Was it from a kid, or when did you start?
Yeah, I started as a kid with my brother. My brother's 4 years older, and we started out in a martial art called Taekwondo, a Korean system. There's two different styles. There's full contact and semi-contact. That's ITF and WTF. We was ITF, the semi-contact style, which was much more visual. The full contact system is practically all kicks, but it was still very much a kick-based martial art, but there were a lot more hands in. It was like semi-contact kickboxing with a gi on. But really loved my years doing it. It brought me and my brother closer together. We competed really extensively during our years. Our club went from a sleepy little seaside club, and when we went there with the enthusiasm, we turned it into a real competitive club. And yeah, we had a lot of success, a lot of good years doing it.
And so you started that right from a kid, right?
Yes.
And with that being semi-contact, would you say that allowed you to be a bit more playful when you were sparring and be a little bit more creative?
Yeah, it taught me discipline for how hard you go. Because Simon Lambert was my Taekwondo coach at the time, and it was all very respectfully based. There was really strict etiquette. If anyone went too hard, you would have a word spoken to you. That said, it weren't too soft either. It was trying to find that right balance. There was a couple of us there that were very, very competitive. Me and my brother, very competitive with each other. And it used to go a little wayward sometimes, but it was always kept with a firm eye and always put back in check. So yeah, it definitely gave me a good sense of knowing how much I can go without it becoming too much. Balance is the key with it, really.
Yeah. I was talking to one of the guys who I was teaching the other day about how you go in sparring. I'm always interested to talk to coaches about sparring, because so many different people have so many different philosophies on it. Some people are hard sparring all the way. Some people are super light sparring. Some people are even advocating for not sparring anywhere near as much. I don't really agree with that, but what are your opinions on how you should spar?
Yeah, this is quite interesting. There's still some clubs, predominantly I see a lot of it in America, although there are clubs here that do it where they do their MMA. We're basing this on MMA sparring now. They do their MMA in boxing gloves, and they do full contact rounds. Now, that's all very well, but you do lose all the intricacies of the clinch and dirty boxing. Dirty boxing is where you clinched up, and wrestling and striking. There's a lot of different handling positions that you can do with MMA gloves that you can't do with boxing gloves. It kind of dilutes down the intricacies of MMA. So I think having some kind of control of your contact wearing a sparring MMA glove is of the utmost importance. So what we say we can spar to a point without intent. So if you catch someone with a clean shot, And it, because sometimes a clean shot is one that could knock you dizzy, not necessarily just the powerful ones, but if you get hit with a clean shot, obviously not to go in and try to finish them off. You back away, ask if they're all right, and you continue to spar. It is a fine line. I feel like over all the years that I've been coaching and training for myself, that we found a really good, a good feel of how it should be done. And I've got to say, we have other people come in from other clubs all the time, and it's always there or about right. It's never too hard. We have people come up from London Shoot, and I would say it's a little bit more competitive when someone else new comes. There's they're definitely trying to win a little harder, but within the realms of good etiquette of control. Never really had too much of an issue with people going too hard, to be honest. It was more back probably about 15-20 years ago that you would have this issue. Well, actually 20 years ago or more, that people really was unsure about how hard you can go. People used to go a little bit too hard, but not so much these days. I just think MMA has evolved to such a degree now that there's a lot of experience within the field.
Would you say it's something you see more with beginners potentially, where they maybe don't know how to control things and it gets out of hand a bit easier?
Yeah, but the beginners very, very quickly learn, because we do have a beginner class, but they quite quickly get introduced up into the more advanced class, and so everyone has a pecking order to go up in the advanced class, or like the more beginner orientated or the intermediate guys all would go together, and so on and so forth, and they get to see the higher level guys spar and how it's done, so they very quickly get an idea of how hard they can and cannot go. So don't really have an issue with that either, to be honest. Tempers do get flared up every now and then, but everyone's so respectful. What I've really noticed about MMA is you just don't get egos. The fighters can be quite selfish. They want success, they want the attention. I get all that, but there's no real bullying style egos in there. I just don't see that very often. It's always really good. It's not an issue that I find I have on a regular basis at all. Just once in a blue moon.
That's fantastic. I've always every over the past few years, I've experienced those times where you get those guys come into the gym that nobody really likes, but I feel like that does, and they go way too hard in sparring, but I feel like that kind of gets kicked out of the gym pretty quickly if everybody is on the same wavelength. And it sounds like that's the sort of environment that you've created.
I mean, I could say the same. I mean, I don't really want to go dropping names because the person still comes training. There was always one guy that would end up going a little bit too hard on some of the people that wasn't quite of his level, and I'd have to keep on reining him in. But what we'd do is, I would have a word, or even some of the other high level students would be like, we would mock them a little bit, like, I'm going to use a random name. Oh, Greg, what you doing, man? Not another beginner. We kind of like tease them about it, like it's not a cool thing to go bashing up and hurting someone of a lower, or with there's a size differential and so on and so forth. So it's kind of shunned upon as a general consensus, particularly at our gym anyway. And everyone toes the line. It's great, but also in that being said, I think we're as close as you can be, without it becoming an outright, bout, if you will.
Yeah. I think this is an idea that for some reason has only came into my mind about sparring literally within the past week. And I don't know how I've never figured this out before. I guess that's part of just evolving and learning. But it was that when you spar light, you're allowed to be more creative and come up with some new strategies and techniques and how to implement them, and you feel safer to do so because you're not worried about getting knocked out. But on the flip side, what I figured out was that it allows you to be a bit more complacent when you're sparring. So if you say when you enter into the range, because you're only light sparring, you may have your right hand down a little bit too low and you may just get caught with a little shot. But because it's only light sparring, you only get a little tap and you don't really worry about it. Whereas if you only do that kind of sparring, when you then go to compete, you can then be a little bit more complacent with how you fight. Whereas if you do a little bit of hard sparring as well, it kind of it allows you to experience what it's like to know that if you do keep that hand down, you're going to get hit and it's going to hurt and potentially knock you out.
Yeah. I mean, look, the professional gloves are what, 4 ounces, and the sparring ones are 8 ounces. It's still not nice, getting a semi-contact style orientated hit to the face. It's just not that pleasurable, and it's certainly not nice being bashed around the body with these gloves on. And even with a shilling step on, it still ain't great taking a body shot or a leg kick. So all of it's consequential enough to not want to have a low guard, and you'll get scorned several times, and I'm sure you'll start putting that chin down and having your guard a little higher, or having a more skillful footwork to avoid being hit again. And it's just that whole balance aspect of how hard you'll go. I just think after a good number of rounds, you begin to find what you can and can't do. But yeah, certainly if you go too light, I think complacency can set in. So what I say with the high level guys is I always say, look, keep everything regards your guard super tight. Try to be perfect in defense, and experiment with your attacks a little bit more broadly. With new ideas with someone slightly lower level. When I say slightly low level, they're still competitive, but they know if they switch it up, they can beat whoever they're sparring with. But I try to get them to try to work other aspects of their game, their weaker side of their game, if you will, and try and do something that they perhaps wouldn't normally do, to try and broaden their game. Because I think the key to be a successful MMA fighter in today's climate is to have a lot of complexity in terms of your choice of attacks, and simplification in defense to decomplicate what's coming at you. So to give an example, if you're going to block high with your left arm and you hold your head like this, it stops everything coming off that side. So if I'm orthodox and the other person's orthodox and they throw a right straight, a right overhand, a right hook, or a right uppercut, shielding with my left elbow up like this, we call it a universal or 3-point blocking system. If I put my arm like that, a straight punch, you hit the forearm, an uppercut hits the elbow, and a hook punch you can angle out and use footwork to make it not be able to come through the hole here. You have to put a footwork aspect in. So it's simplification of the potential complexity that comes upon you. To me, that's the real key of attack, defense, and potentiality of counters. It's so complicated what could come at you. You can't predict it. So you've got to have some kind of simplification there to keep you safe. You can't have a defense for every type of strike that comes at you. So, let's look at a straight jab. You can't palm it up, only, and then a hook comes and you've got to block it out wide. It's just not good. What we try to do as an example of simplification is, try to have as little movement to create defense of what's coming at you. So let's take that cross punch, slightly different from a jab, but you'll understand why I'm saying this. A cross punch is a little further away and has more load on it, more power, but it's got more distance to travel to come at you. And so, you're going to have more time, therefore, to respond to it, right? You kind of get in the logic of, how we're trying to work the sort of like the system. It's got to be simplified in some way. You can't possibly have an individual defense for every individual attack.
Yeah, that's something that I coach, but I coach beginners, right? So people who have never done anything before or who have done a little bit before. And one of the things that I always run into is, what's the answer for this? What's the answer for that? What's the answer for this? What's the answer for that? And they're always looking for a solution to the problem. Whereas if you can have more of one of the things that I've recently figured out is, instead of going to your coach and having an answer for every single problem, you can have an idea of, if I use this underhook, for example, I can move him in a load of different ways, and that can work in loads of different positions, not just the one position that I've been shown to drill in class.
Yeah.
So you understand how the moves work on a fundamental level, and you can use loads of different areas around. Sorry, I'm getting loads of messages come through.
I can't hear anything.
Okay, cool. I can hear it. It's really annoying me. Interrupted my flow there. Yeah. So instead of going to your coach and having only the solutions that your coach gives you, you can get a basic idea, and then you can use that and adapt it with your own mind and your own skill set and your own game. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You know, I explained to beginners very early on, and I have to explain this again and again, even to the more advanced students, that, you know, if I ask someone, oh, you know, what do you think's good about striking? You know, what's, you know, what do you think's a really important skill set? They'll always talk about, you know, having good power, having good technique, having good combinations, and things like that. But, you know, the truth of being a good striker, as an example, and this is going back to, you know, trying to be logical with things, and thinking out the box. Actually, to become a very good striker, you have to be very aware and understanding of range, distance, and how can I explain this? Yeah. Right, I'm trying to get my thoughts here because I'm trying to think that there's going to be people that are not of high level. How can I explain this to you? I'm losing my train of thought here. I'm making it too complicated. But yeah, the importance is in defense, because you've got to be in it to still win it, right? So it's all very well. You can have the hardest punch in the world. You can have great striking and attacking potential. But if you don't have great defense, you're going to fall apart, particularly under fatigue. So a good example of this is Conor McGregor. I think he's shown to be an incredible sharpshooter with a lot of power. But once his gas tank had become questionable, he had no defense really to fall back on. His footwork wasn't the best at going backwards and avoiding. His blocking game and his overall defense structure was not the greatest. It's quite porous, and he become really exposed. He was only dangerous as long as he was the attacker. Does that kind of make sense? It's actually more important to have your defensive aspect, your understanding of range and how to avoid it, so the skill of footwork. And particularly with MMA striking, you have to also think and understand about, you know, structuring your striking frame and your blocking game and your reference point for takedowns as well. I think this is the most important thing. And then once you've got that skill of having such confidence defense, then what you'll notice is you'll become the predator, because you're confident at not being hit. Now, we all get hit because that's the nature of the game. You can't defend absolutely everything. But when you know that the percentages are in your favor to avoid most of the things coming at you, all you seem to focus on is what you want to do to the other guy. Does that make sense? So this is another thing, a part of training, that I'm, you know, not a big fan of having one fresh person going in after another when you've already got a high level guy in there, but with high level guys doing that, because all you're teaching the person to do, you're teaching them to have a frame of mind of survival only, and not being the attacker, because it's not realistic to have someone fresh time and time again. So, you know, you've got to, you know, bring things back to reality in terms of your training. I'm kind of going off on a tangent here. Once I get talking, I just go from one thing to another, so you'll have to sometimes stop me. But I hope I make sense with what I'm saying. You know, anyone could show, even someone of intermediate level will say, yeah, jab, cross, hook, round kick to the leg. You know, a real classic kickboxing style combination. It's so easy to come up with attacking combinations. But when I question someone, okay, so if someone comes at you with that combination, how would you defend it? Or, okay, so they'll come up with their version of how to defend it. Okay, so how would you defend it in a way to counter it? And a lot of them just don't have a structured, even high level guys don't have a structured way of breaking down how they would defend, slip it, and counter it. You know, they just come up with an idea on the spot and they have to really think about it. Well, if you're thinking about it, it ain't in your game, because you can't do striking thinking, okay, here comes a jab and here comes a cross. You've got to have something reactionary. And so to have a reaction, you've got to really think about, all the potentials, and have a game plan and a theory to it all.
Yeah, so there's a really interesting thing you said there, and I think a lot of it comes from pad holding. I'm not personally, and I could be wrong on this, I'm not a huge fan of masses and masses of pad work. I much prefer, like the Dutch kickboxing style drills. I'm a massive fan of this because first of all, if you get a bad pad holder, and there's a lot of them, all of a sudden your training session's just going to be an awful training session, right? Because they're holding the pads out here, they're holding the kicks up here when it's meant to be for the body, and it's just an absolute mess. Whereas if you're doing the Dutch kickboxing style drills, they have to be in their stance first of all. You're moving around. I don't like it when they just stand in front of each other. Personally, I like to get the people moving around as if they're sparring, right? You've got your guard up, you're in the right position, and you have to actually find the shot on the person instead of on the pad. If someone's holding a pad here, well, my face is here, not out here. Right? And sure, if you get a good pad holder, they might bring it into the middle. But even still, like my face now, if I'm holding the pad, my face is here, not here, right?
Yeah. So, I totally agree. I totally agree with you, particularly with Thai pad training. So, when MMA fighters get to a certain skill level, all that pad work does is just maintain the skill level of the technique of each individual strike or your set combinations. There's only so much of that you can do. I think the key to me is sparring up the right way, having good ideas, having strategy, being able to. The only thinking part that you should be doing in your fight or in your sparring is, okay, this isn't working. What direction? How am I going to come up with something new to try to steer this fight another way? Is implementing under pressure other strategies. So you'll have, game plan A. I'm going to try and take this guy down. I'm going to press him against the fence. I'm a bigger guy. I think I can out wrestle him. But it turns out you can't. His footwork's too good. What are you going to do to try to find another way of getting into that wrestling realm? You've tried to punch away and it's not going to work. So maybe, hey, bring him onto you a little bit. Get this guy striking. Try and trade with him on the feet so he trades back and then shoot underneath. Try and find another way to get an entry. I think this is the kind of thing that people, when they get to, say, a high level, should be thinking about trying to advance their training, rather than getting it all through pads, because there's only so much skill level pads will do. I don't know whether you've ever done much stick fight training, but we've got a really good stick fighting coach, Damien Mills. He's like, my goodness, something like 18 times British champion, 14 times European, and over 10 times world champion. Full contact stick fighting. It's brutal. But nevertheless, they do a set sequence of patterns. There's 9 striking angles with a stick as an example. And they do set drills to block the stick angles with their stick. But that's a drill. And what they say is, once you've got your drill, you almost want to throw those drills away. It's only to establish good technique and the understanding of what needs to be done when something comes at you and how to intercept it. But after a while, things ain't done in a set sequence, like a pattern. Eventually you got to do it innovatively and reactionary, and that's why I love the sparring. I'm really shocked to hear that some of these high level guys say, "Oh, no longer spar." I suppose you could get to a level perhaps where sparring becomes less important. I suppose as you're becoming long tooth in your career, and you want to hang on to some youth in terms of not taking any more punishment. But if you're taking a lot of punishment, you was either fighting and doing your career wrong, or you've certainly been training wrong. I just think that's why I like to train and spar in the training MMA gloves rather than the boxing gloves, because I think getting hit full contact all the time and it takes something out of you in some way, and it ain't great being bashed around the head all the time. But with these MMA gloves, you might get some aesthetic damage to the face. You might get a scuff, a black eye, sometimes a bleeding nose, and every now and then you get a cut. But I'd much rather that than I would the internal damage of what wearing these head armor and the big heavy boxing gloves. I mean, That's got to be traumatic for the brain.
Yeah, that's something that I come from a little bit more of a kickboxing background, and everybody's like, "Oh, you've got to have 16-ounce gloves on to spar," and I don't know if this is me being dumb. It could very well be, but I'm like, surely that's more weight going into the brain there, no?
Yeah, it's the shaking, isn't it?
Yeah,
A boxing glove is softer, more bulkier. So it's just gonna shake the head more. But an MMA glove is more firm, um, and like I say, it's going to do more outer damage than it is going to do internal damage. I mean, look, no strike around the head is better than taking strikes. It'll always be the case. All sports come with a danger. I think one of the most dangerous sports for serious injuries is something like show jumping. But because it's a wealthy community, yeah, like young girls having broken necks and having horrific falls in training, all get squashed and kept down quiet because it's a wealthy community and they want to keep what they do going. But yeah, I'm a big advocate of sparring, and not just unwatched sparring. I think sparring is really important to have more than one coach watching it. So sometimes I'll have our boxing coach who understands MMA. We have our boxing coach there. I have Raymond Paul there, who's a coach alongside me, and then you have me. And sometimes he'll corner one guy, I'll corner another, and then afterwards we talk about it. It's about micromanaging the game, particularly in the level that you're getting to now. The level really is crazy high, and it's just going to get not necessarily any higher than it is now, but what you're going to get is you're going to get a thicker, denser of that highest level throughout each division. Whereas you still have the top 5 guys who are clearly better than people as they slip out of the top 10. You're going to have the top 15 that could kind of beat anyone on any given day. The only way you're going to sort of like have the edge is by micromanaging the tactics, strategies, techniques, trying to be innovative as well. There's no point, say if jumping, spinning, heel kick was the flavour of the day. It's a new thing that seemed to be catching MMA fight. There's no point just mimicking that. You've got to come up with your own attacks as well. It's so hard now to have an edge in the MMA in the modern day climate. It really is. You've got to think out the box. You've got to create your own path.
There was something you mentioned a few minutes back now, which I wanted to retouch on. You kind of mentioned it a little bit there, is about what comes out instinctively. So I remember the very first time I competed, I had this stupid plan in my brain of I was going to knock the person out nice and simply with a question mark kick, and that was going to be the end of it, right? Obviously, that didn't happen. And all of a sudden, because that didn't happen, I started to panic, and my natural instincts were to just do this, and I got hit in the face quite a lot, and it didn't feel very nice. And then what I've kind of realized over the past few years is you need to have masses and masses and masses of this. It doesn't even have to be sparring. It can be like a live kind of drill scenario or whatever, where there's some resistance so that you can condition your instincts to have better responses. And then I spoke to a guy called Eric Paulson. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yeah, amazing man. I mean, I used to watch his training videos back in the late 1990s. I learned a lot of my ground game back in the day from watching his instructionals as it was back then.
Yeah, I luckily he replied to my DM on Instagram, and we ended up having a podcast together. And it was
I saw, yeah.
Oh, okay, great. It got barely any views, but it was one of the best 2 hours. We ended up having a bit of a conversation off the podcast as well. It was one of the best 2 hours for learning for me. And he was just talking about this sparring. You need to spar. If you don't spar, you're not conditioning yourself and your instincts, and you're just going to have. You're not going to have that natural ability, and everything's going to be a little bit more. When you go to compete, you're not gonna that instinct isn't going to be there, and it's not going to. Trying to formulate the words, but you're not going to have the correct responses essentially.
Yeah, It's basically pressure testing. But that said, when I say balance, I think balance is the key to life, not only. And when I say balance, I'm not on talking about being on a balance beam here. Balance in terms of doing too much or too little of anything. If you do too much sparring, not only is it quite hard on the body, but you can also become stale. I used to play a lot of chess, and I remember when I used to play too much chess, we used to say you could suffer from a thing called chess blindness. You end up making blunders, basically, and you'd be like, oh my goodness, you start making rookie mistakes or beginner mistakes. You just don't see something. And so rather than moving the game tactically or strategically in a hard-fought game, you'll just throw the game away all of a sudden. This can happen when you play too much chess, and if you spar too much, you become complacent. You become no longer you performing pressure performance, because it's got to be a little bit of pressure to make yourself feel live and switched on. And you've got to have a little bit of, not fear, but you've got to have a little bit of a dislike. I don't want to get caught or lose. But when you do too much of it, you kind of end up going through the motions, and that's a bad thing as well. So yeah, sparring to me is so important to grow your skills, to feel the pressure performance, but again, not too much. So some of the lads just love to spar, and sometimes I pull them back from sparring because I can see that they're becoming stale. They're kind of like sparring for the pleasure of it, and they're no longer pushing to win. So when I get two guys in the cage, sometimes I have to push them a little bit and say to them, look, I want a winner in this round. And so they have to really think about it. Now, no one's allowed to win with a knockout. No one's allowed to win by injuring someone with some crazy jumping submission. They have to win tactically and kind of like checkmate the guy, if you will, and they have to really push physically, mentally to try to get that win, and to try to push the boundaries and keep things reality based and freshen up that pressure performance, because I can tell they've been doing a lot and they need that little extra push. Hey, come on, guys, don't just spar and just go through it and enjoy it and have a little tit for tat. You have a strike, I have a strike. No, push for the takedown, press them up against the wall. So this is again why I think it's good to have more than one coach watch, because they want to show off to the coaches. One coach normally picks one guy and I start to pick the other, and it creates that element of competition, and it forces that live reactive training.
So that's an interesting thing you're saying there. So you're almost creating a mini competition in the gym.
Yeah, you have to push a little bit. So something I've noticed with some of the highest level guys that we got, but they know they're both some of the top strikers in the gym. They know they can wrestle some and they can grapple some. And what they do is they're sometimes just not up for the row, and they'll go really quite light. They'll kind of like have an agreement without it being said that as soon as one starts light, the other respects the other guy. Like, well, yeah, I know it's really competitive otherwise, and they'll go, a little tit for tat light, and they kind of just go through a round, and no one got anything from it. I think if you're going to spend time to spar, make sure it's always quality time, or just don't spar at all. If you're not in the mood to spar and try to win, don't spar. But then, of course, not everyone's level are so closely matched where it's a competition. And hence, I said, like a little earlier, if you are a lot higher level or a little bit higher level than someone else, and when you really push it, you can win, maybe try something new, so that when you do make mistakes, it's a little something to recover from. But then try again. If you want to find out what works, what don't work in the training room, we call it a laboratory sometimes. You want to find out what works and what don't work in the lab when you're trying to create something new before you put it out into the public. So that's kind of how we try to look at our training and our sparring.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So one of the things I noticed was you've got Jordan, who's in the UFC. You've got a bunch of other fighters as well. You've had a guy called Tariq, is that correct?
Tarek Pal, yeah.
Yeah.
Pal.
So I actually did a little bit of training a few years ago. He coached me a little bit when I very first started. And I noticed that they're in Thailand at the moment, right?
That's right, yeah. They've gone out there for just a little over 2 weeks to train together out there.
Yeah. So I'm actually myself going to Bang Tao in about 6 weeks. And one of the things I love to do is to go and train around other gyms and train under other coaches. How important do you think that is? Do you think that you don't need to do that, or what do you think?
Oh man, absolutely. I'm a big advocate for my students to get any kind of training they can with any other coaches. You know, if I felt anything was questionable about them going to a certain coach, I would certainly voice my opinion on it because I want the best for my student. But yeah, I'm a big advocate. I would always push them to try to get some experience, and you know, if they pick up something that they feels valuable and new, to come back and share it with me, and we kind of grow all together. I'm not an insecure coach by any stretch. I know what parts of my strengths, and I know there's certain parts of my game that will be considered more weaker. And so I'm up for learning all the time. To me, I'm a hoarder of techniques and ideas, and also an innovator, because I think the more ideas you can learn, the more techniques you can learn, the more ideas you can create yourself. And I love that. You know what? I wouldn't coach anymore at the level I do in MMA if I couldn't be an innovator. We have our own system, our own way of thinking, and it's forever evolving. How we was training and coaching the team 10 years ago is not how we're doing it now, and I'm sure in the next 10 years it won't be how we're doing it now. It'll be different then. You have to constantly evolve. If you're not evolving, for me, I would be stepping back from coaching, because to me, I wouldn't have the passion then. There'd be something missing. You've got to keep moving forward. So I try and explain it like this. You know, you've got your home and you've got your work address. You could just do the same route. Yeah, so a lot of fighters are picking a very similar route to how other fighters are trying to get to becoming UFC champion. To me, there's more than one route. There's other routes you can go. And so I think it's important to carve your own route, your own way of becoming a UFC champion. You don't have to go to only American Top Team to make it happen. I think we've proved that. We've had several British champions now that haven't gone stateside to train. You know, look at Aspinall. You know, he's done predominantly all his training here. You know, you can make it. Be confident in the ability that we have here in the UK. But you know, that said, yes, branch out and experience other places too. Yeah, you've got to be a thief of all techniques and knowledge, right? To know what's out there, and then come up with things that ain't out there, so you can hit them with surprises in the cage.
It sounds like you don't have much ego in terms of, I'm your coach, you have to do it how I do it. And it sounds like you also have a lot of other coaches who have quite a big influence on the fighters as well.
I've had coaches in the past, and again, I won't go into names, that have been quite insecure about me training other systems and with other people, and it didn't feel comfortable, and was ultimately undoing of the relationship, where I felt that I should move on, to a point that I ended up going out on my own and creating my own team and surrounding myself with the coaches I felt were applicable to pushing the team to the kind of position we're in today. So yeah, it's an evolution of my experiences that I've had with what I considered was good coaching and bad coaching, and yeah, and I try to make things work from those experiences. So yeah, I'm pretty loose with the guys in terms of where they can go and train, and just come back and share it all. And likewise, we're very open where we have fighters come from all over. I just want to see these young guys and girls do the best that they can be, more than the team. I mean, my team BST means a lot to me, don't get me wrong, but people mean more to me than a team. A team is just the label of a collective set of people that train out of one camp. But really, I'm in it for, you know, the personal relationship that I have with people. So when it's an outside guy that's training and representing another gym, I will still teach them and give them ideas, because they're on a personal journey with their hopes of what they want to get from it, and I can live through them through that. And so, you know, I feel their appreciation when I give them a bit of attention, saying, hey, look, you know, I've noticed your left hand's a lot lower than it should be. Maybe try and get up a little bit more and do it like this a little bit more. And I just love giving that sort of that love for the support that I've got onto anyone, regardless of whether they're my team member or not, because I'm in it for the people as well. I'm in it for the individual.
So you've got this like real passion. You can tell when you're talking. Like, first of all, obviously you're incredibly knowledgeable, but like you can hear it in your voice. You seem incredibly passionate about.
Yeah, it's
sorry.
It's given me a lot of love. You know, I've really enjoyed my years competing in all the different formats, but ultimately MMA. And I also really enjoy seeing the students come through and go through their difficulties and come through those difficulties and then get their successes. It's bonding. It really is. You know, my students, some of them are just students, you know, some people you gel with more than others, but you know, a really good example is with Jordan. You know, he's been training with me since he was a very young man, you know, an adolescence really, and you know, he's developed into a young man, a great father, and I've watched him go through all that. I've looked after his kids, and the bond is strong. You know, it's a friendship as well as it is a coach and student. And look, Jordan's good enough to be a coach in his own right, and indeed he does help out coaching as well. You know, fantastic individual, and for which there are many in the gym. I'm just using him as an example. So yeah, there is a lot of passion for the sport, but a lot of that passion is being driven by being surrounded by a lot of great students and a lot of great friends that have come from that.
I think that's one thing martial arts is really good for, isn't it? Is the community and the relationships that you build. I think when you agree to spar with someone and you're trying to choke each other out, you have to have that level of trust there. And the more time you spend with people doing that, all of a sudden these people have become your friends without even really realizing it.
Yeah. Something that we've been doing, we've been trying to make occasions where we meet out where it's separate from training, although training is quite often a topic. You know, we've been meeting out for meals. You know, when no fights are coming up, we'll go out and even have a few beers together. We've been trying to create bond by trying to do outside things. Now, it's really done seasonally, I suppose, at most, because everyone is busy in a fight camp of sorts because the team's, you know, of reasonable size. But you know, in wintertime we'll have one out in spring we'll get one out, in summertime we'll get one out in all together. And I think that's also really good way of helping bond the club, and to help push to a higher level, because it's all very well having a student and coach relationship, but when you really get that bond of not only friend with coach but student with other student, it really helps. A coach all on his own can't run a massive team at a certain level from grassroots all the way up to world class such as we have, without other coaches and also the more experienced students acting as coaches as well. Does that make sense? So I think my batteries run out on these. You have to forgive me. You have to let me know if anything changes.
Okay.
I can still hear you, but it might cut out, but we'll still get by anyway. So yeah, does that make sense? So, you know, I always push the more experienced students to trickle down what they know. Don't leave it all for the coaches. If you see someone do something wrong, tell them. And this happens time and time again. And I love it. I absolutely love it. Even when I'm coaching and I'm doing a technique, Jordan goes, "Oh yeah, this is something I have success with. Same sort of thing, but I add this on as well because they normally react like that. Do you mind if I show it? Go on, Jordan, go and do it." And okay, I'll come round everyone. So what Danny's just showing and what works for me is I notice that they drop their arm when you do this, and then this opens up, and I've been getting this. This is wonderful. I love it. I love it. And yeah, this is what I think we've got something special. Now, no doubt there are other clubs, I'm sure, with special bonds. I think there's amazing teams out there. GB Top Team with Brad Pickett, incredible. Obviously got great bonds with his students. An intelligent man, had him on my podcast, an absolute smart individual. People think fighters are dumb. Someone, Brad Pickett, ain't dumb. Someone else who I think is a fantastic coach and clearly got something going really, really well is James Doolan. I think James Doolan possibly is the best coach we've got in the United Kingdom, and someone that I see and look up to and respect. He does things a different way from I'm choosing to do things, but that's what makes it all interesting, right? You know, I'm sure at some point we'll be crossing paths with each other where one of his guys is fighting one of mine or girls, and may the best team win. So, but yeah, but it's quite rare. There are so many clubs out there that are sort of like on their own path, but there's nothing super special. You know, there's just, they haven't reached that point where their chemistry is just right. And I feel like we've gone through that process. We've broken through that, and we've learnt that through all of our experiences. And yeah, BST special, man. It really is.
It sounds sounds like you've got a really good thing going on. You mentioned a couple of other coaches there, Brad Pickett, James Doolan, as other coaches that
Yeah.
you respect. What is something that you, when you look at other coaches, what makes you sit there and think, I respect that coach. That's one of the best coaches in the
Right.
UK.
Yeah. So I can't truly know because I'm not in their pocket every day. I'm not training with these people every day. But from my experience of talking to Brad Pickett, I've seen him in the changing rooms, coaching these fighters, warming them up. So professional, really knowledgeable. And when I watch James Doolan, I'll probably watch him through Facebook and what he does. Always got the pads on, holding pads for his students, doing really, really good stuff. And like I say, does it a little different from how I'd consider to do it. But, the amount of passion. James Doolan is always reading books, to innovate ideas and thinking. And I'm trying to apply that into his training with his students. But, look at the success his students have. And he seems to have a massive pool of fighters. I just really respect that. I really do. They've got as much love as I do for the sport, and they've got a slightly different way of thinking about it than I do. But nevertheless, the passion is the same. Yeah.
I think one of the things that I've picked up from all the different guys I've spoke to, I've been lucky enough to speak to some incredible coaches. And some guys who have coached at a really high level, some guys who are quite well known, some guys who aren't quite well known but have still got that knowledge base. One of the things that I've picked up is there's just, if you want to be a high level coach, one of the reasons I do this is because I want to be in a position like you are in the future, having a plethora of high level fighters, and that's a goal of mine, is that you have to have this willingness to continually try and improve and learn. You mentioned about reading books and having conversations with people and watching hours and hours of material. Is that something that you believe you have to do, or am I incorrect with that?
I think you just have to have, first of all, hope that you can get there. Without hope, you've got no drive. Motivation, sort of goes hand in glove. You've got to be motivated. You've got to constantly try to learn. And like I say, with MMA, you kind of got to innovate. I still think all the complexity of the potentiality of attacks and strategies have not been played out yet. I think there's room for new ideas. And like I say, we push what we feel are new ideas anyway. Now, maybe when we're trying to come up with something that we feel is new, might not be new. It might be done somewhere else. But, still our thinking process is to come up with new theories and ideas about how we go about surprising people with, future plans and attacks. But I mean, you got to have a healthy body, a healthy mind. You got to have good people around you. I think more than one coach. I couldn't make the team BST on my own. We've got fantastic wrestling coaches. We've got a really good boxing coach in Lee Edwards that, he's on a learning curve. He's always saying, look, I've been trying to teach him like this. Is that fit in with your MMA? And sometimes I've gone over to him and said, look, when you're holding pads for them, could you get them to switch their footwork more? Because we can't do that in MMA. So now he gets all the MMA guys who have one-to-ones with him. He gets them all switching their footwork. We work collectively really, really well. I think that's a big part of why we're successful, is because all the coaches have a great connection with each other. We all respect our individual fields, and they have a genuine interest in MMA to modify what they know and to make it fit alongside with my ideas. And it's a wonderful experience. I still even go to Damian Mills, who I mentioned, who's a very successful JKD coach and done the full contact. So he understands what full contact, he understands what that was all about in terms of the stick. But I run through ideas about angles because this guy has got so much knowledge, and it might surprise MMA guys from the outside to think that I would run things past him. But unless you got talking to him, you wouldn't understand what I'm talking about. He understands about mechanics, angles, it's just wonderful. I remember once getting a conversation with Damien Mills, my boxing coach Lee Edwards, and myself, and we were talking about the martial arts as a general and also MMA, and the conversation was just so interesting because it come from three different perspectives, and it was a conversation that went on for about half hour, but we had to go. But I wanted we should have had it with a pint of beer down the pub, and we could have gone on for hours with that conversation that we had touched on. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, well, it's all body mechanics, right? Like, people always shit on things like taekwondo, karate, and mainly those they get most of the flack. But it's all body mechanics, you know. Like, the body is still working in the same way. Sure, it's a different sport, but it's still relevant.
Yeah. Okay, so just let you know, these batteries are just gone. So we're doing freelance.
No problem. I won't take up too much more of your time anyway, because obviously we had the whole mess up as well. I've just got one more thing that I wanted to speak with you about, and that is, what is something that you think makes a great fighter or athlete in the? I guess that's a different question. What makes a great fighter in your opinion in MMA?
Yeah. So you've had great fighters in the past that perhaps didn't need quite what a fighter today needs because of the levels got to such a degree. You have to have a healthy, athletic body. So good genetics is kind of a must now to be a standout. I'm talking trying to get to UFC, top 15. You have to have something special about you athletically. You have to have something about your mind that's very self-motivating, because you could still make a good fighter but not a great fighter through the coach being the motivating aspect of that fighter, phoning them up, come to the gym, come on, well, I haven't seen you for this week. These people just won't make it. This, unfortunately, I've seen it time and time again of really talented guys that, because they're talented, they're lazy. But you do get the oddity that both got the athleticism, they got self-motivation, they also respond to your motivation to push that little bit harder. They sort of like will agree and suck it up. They're like, yes, yeah, okay, I've got to do more. And also, I think something that I think is hugely important is not letting outside personal life intervene with your career. A fight career is a short, small window. Come on, as soon as you reach 35, only a few people in the heavier weight divisions can stay relevant. Certainly in welterweight and below, 35 and above, you're going to struggle being in that top 15. You start becoming irrelevant. You can still be a good fighter, but you're not going to be matching these people 10 years younger than you. So it's a small window of opportunity. So when you have relationship issues, you've got to try to not let that affect your career and your trajectory, because all it's going to do is take a year or maybe 2 years and so on and so forth out of your career. So I think that's an attribute that many fighters will struggle to do. Now, again, I can't go mentioning names, but they've all got personal issues going on in their lives. Some of them, it takes them away from training for a few weeks, or their mind's not in it when they're training. And there's some of them that suck it up, and when they're in the gym, they focus about, they forget about their woes and their problems outside their lives. I think that's an attribute that's been the undoing of a potential great fighter, and just because outside personal issues have got in the way, they were not great for as long a period as they were great, or they don't quite reach that great height of their potential. I'm probably being way too complicated here. So that, and also the combination of having good coaches and not insecure coaches that will allow that fighter to accumulate knowledge and experiences through going elsewhere as well, but always coming back to touch base at home to ever improve that team. And I think that's why our team has continued to evolve and become relevant for so long. I've been coaching for over 20 years now, and always in each of those areas at the top level, being that we've got a few fighters in UFC as well. I think the only way that that's been able to happen is because, my students have gone elsewhere, come back with ideas, and some of those ideas have become part of our system. And so we grow.
Have you ever had a situation where someone's wanted, they say they want something, but maybe you've recognized that they're not putting in the work, or maybe they don't have what it takes? Have you ever had that situation? Obviously, you don't have to mention it if you don't want to or whatever, but
Yeah. No, I will. So we had a bit of a mutiny happen a few years ago now, not many years ago, but literally just a couple of years ago, where some of these fighters are wannabe fighters. Now, they're talented, but they didn't like it that we were saying that you should really be fighting a weight lower than you are. You know, as soon as you get to a certain level, you're not going to be relevant. You're naturally a featherweight or a bantamweight, so on and so forth. They were always full of motivation when they had a fight, but they weren't full of motivation otherwise. Now, this is what I love about Jordan. You know, I'll keep using him as an example, but he's been my first student. Has been easy from grassroots all the way up to world class, and continues to be. I can't stand these fighters that are only motivated when they've got a fight and they want to, because it's hard to have a fight camp and learn and evolve and grow. To me, when you haven't got a fight, that's the time to do all your growing and your learning and your educating. And then fight camps, just getting fit, getting focused, and getting your engine fine-tuned to make you the best you can be physically on that day. But when you're out of camp, you've got to continue to learn. And this is something that created a mutiny of fighters with the attitude of didn't like what me and Raymond and Lee Edwards were saying. And some of the other students around them that were decent level guys, grapplers, let's say, and they created a clique. And what they ended up doing, I had another coach coaching with us. Again, I won't go dropping the names because they got their own team, they got their own hopes and dreams that they're trying to live by now, but it's not working out very well for them, let me just say that. They all broke away from us, even to a point where one of those coaches was still coaching 1 day a week and using that 1 day a week to steer students and fighters away to their team. And now I've watched and used what they've done as an example for the students that stayed and continue to come, of what happens when you allow a student to run their own affairs, because that's what they've done. They've broken away, and these fighters run and do things how they choose to do it. And all they've done is take fights with, because they know they're doing it wrong in their gut know-how. And what they've done is they've taken fights, professional fights with people who've never had a fight before, never even trained martial arts, people off the street, to a point where it's absolutely embarrassing. Now, these people had potential to be good and great fighters if they had listened and done what they should have been doing. But to see them win titles with people with losing records, way under the weight that they should be at, and it's embarrassment, and I'm ashamed to have been associated with them. Now, if they ever listen to this podcast, they'll know exactly that I'm talking about them. And I hope they respect the fact that I'm not eavesdropping their names. But the coaching as well, the whole place that they broke away from. It makes me sound like I'm being bitter, and I'm absolutely not. I'm kind of like it was a good riddance type of thing that happened. It actually improved our team because there was something wrong. There was something not feeling right. So I think I've come away from the original question so much so now I don't even know what I'm answering, but yeah, I've had difficult students and they went their own way, and they've shot themselves in their own foot regards what they wanted to be, because they ain't going to make it anymore, unfortunately.
So when there's that, was it a training problem in terms of training techniques, or was it more of just a wanting to take fights at the wrong time?
Yeah. So what was happening was there was a foreign contingent in there, and because they had the idea of starting up their own team, they started up a little club of their own, but it was just a tiny little thing, and they kept on trying to make out it wasn't going to be anything much. But what they did was, when another coach came in, or I gave this guy a job to coach alongside me, and because I would be really humble and nice to this guy to make him feel welcome, I would talk highly about him. Oh, he's a great addition to the team, blah, blah, blah. they thought, oh, well, that's the final key of what they needed to separate from us. So it was several coaches and several of the fighters. And they all deserve. The one thing I said to everyone is that let them go, let them do what they want to do, because they all deserve each other. Because now they're all stabbing each other behind their backs. This is what we're hearing, you know. They're all stabbing each other behind their backs. The team's kind of falling apart. The original fighters that were there have now gone with another team, because they know that they weren't going to get anywhere as they went off and was trying to do it on their own. Yeah. It was quite an experience. It really affected me for, you know, as much as I'm quite a thick-skinned individual, it kind of, at the time, I was worried about how many fighters were going to leave. You know, to a point, actually, where Jordan was quite close with some of the people that left. And I remember me and Raymond Paul, he's sort of like my right-hand man as a coach, were questioning him, like, do you think Jordan's going to go? And I said, if Jordan knows what's good for him, he'll see past it. And he did. He's just like, well, man, I'm going nowhere. But it did make me feel insecure at the time. For the first time in 20 years of coaching, I was a little insecure, thinking, am I perhaps becoming irrelevant? You know, maybe I'm doing things wrong. Yeah, it was an emotional time. It hurt. It hurt. I lost some friends over it that I thought were friends, and yeah, not nice.
Yeah,
But it worked out well in the end.
That's always good, right? I heard Teddy Atlas talking about. I love listening to Teddy Atlas. Sometimes he can ramble, but I love listening to him. He's an incredible mind. And he was talking about it hurts to be loyal, right? And you only know if someone's loyal after there's been a test. And it's quite an intense thing, but it's again a testament to you though, right? Is that people like Jordan stayed, and now your team is thriving, right?
Yeah. It's just when you feel that you've got a friendship with someone, and then it turned out not to be what you were thinking it was, and you basically was just getting used, and yeah, it was horrible, man. You know, the kind of thing that I experienced there. You know, I'm 51 years old now, so I was approaching 50 when this happened. I haven't felt like that since I had a group of friends when we were all teenagers and older teenagers becoming, young adults, and you would have an argument between friends, and you part ways. Some choose one friend, others chose another, and you get this like little break, and it's kind of the end of an era of the group of friends as you had it. It kind of broke the end of a little bit of an era of the way things was. But in hindsight of it all happening, I realised that there was a weight lifted from the gym. There was a lot of gossiping behind coaches' backs that I was aware of what was happening, but kind of I was turning a blind eye to it, thinking it would just go away and sort itself out. But it's like a stone in your shoe, and I should have intervened, to be honest with you. I was being too much of a nice guy. It's like a stone in your shoe, and you're just like, it's not bothering me, but then you leave it in there and it becomes a big problem, and you should have just taken it out all along. It was one of those situations, but it feels good to talk about it. It's turned into a therapy session, Brad.
I'll send you the invoice, mate. Yeah, no, it's I won't take up any more of your time, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. Is there anything that you want to promote? Is there any page you want to send people to, or?
So I run a online coaching site called MMA Unlocked. It works from beginner all the way up to world class. It is techniques, and it's also strategies. And one of the other things that we put on there, if anyone's interested, sign up to it, is we'll show some tactics and ideas of a fighter and who they're fighting against and what game plans we're putting in place. And then you actually see the game plan unfold. And an example of it was we got a world-class striker called Marin Fatali. He does strike coaching at our gym as well. An incredible striker that had to learn to anti-wrestle, wrestle and grapple, and still very much a work in process. He's had recent wins on Cage Warriors. He's going to be a devastating lightweight. Trust me, this guy's going to be going UFC bound if he stays on track. And we used him as an example on our MMA Unlocked on how we had to strategize him fighting a very good wrestler, Iranian wrestler. So, you know, if you just pit a good striker against a really good wrestler and that's their main skill set, you would say it's always in the wrestler's favor. But we come up with a really, really good anti-wrestling strategy and tactics to overcome this guy and come with a predicted win in the way that we did. So it gives you an insight. Not only is it techniques, but it gives you a little insight on how a team has to game plan when you know you've got two different styles, and you know, see what we're saying before the fight and how it actually played out. We give you examples within the fight of how we was training and how it actually came out into the fight, how we could predict what was going to happen to push towards that win.
That's really interesting.
MMA Unlocked.
That sounds really, yeah, it sounds like a really, really interesting thing. Actually, I'd definitely be interested in that. Is that linked in your Instagram or?
Yeah. So yeah, you can. I put examples, and I do a lot of like teaser videos on Instagram. But yeah, just put MMA Unlocked in, and you can have a look. You can see through my Instagram. On my Facebook, I put some examples up. You can go onto YouTube as well. Yeah, it's it might be something that takes off. You know, once we got all the techniques on there, it's it just becomes a database of techniques, knowledge, and so on and so forth. And we're also trying to create a little bit of a community on there. So after a big UFC event, I'll sometimes do a discussion where I just say, hey, Pereira and so on, you know, Pereira come through won. Tell me why you think it worked well for him and why it didn't work for so-and-so. And then people put their perspective on why they think the win happened. And then I'll just say, yeah, I agree, or I don't quite agree because I think it's more like this and it's more a case of that. And we create a little discussion about all the big fights that have just been. So it's a community-based site as well. It's really good. I'm enjoying it.
I'll make sure to leave a link to that in the description of the video as well.
Sure, that would be really appreciated, Brad.
No problem.